Ladies, gentlemen, and loyal viewers of all ages, we are coming to the end of a cycle. Another trip around the sun, 2023 dusted and done, and as we do so, it becomes a wonderful time of reflection on a particularly abnormal year when it comes to video games. Recently, we talked about some particularly shitty games that came out in this last year, but they are counterbalanced by some of the best game releases that we've had in the last decade also happening to come in the last few months. And so to create balance, of course, today I'm going to talk about my personal top 10 games of the year, many of the games that I think are the best from the ones that I was actually able to play, by which I mean there are of course some honorable mentions for games that I've heard nothing but great things about, but never actually got around to myself. Final Fantasy XVI, Alan Wake 2, loved the first one of that game series years ago, Street Fighter 6, heard they've been doing an extremely good job with that, and then there's Super Mario Bros. Wonder 2 for the more Mamma Mia inclined. But those are simply games that I think worth mentioning that I haven't played, so let's dive into my actual proper list itself with number 10, Diablo 4. I have an extreme love-hate relationship with this game. On release, I was really into it. The campaign is fantastic, the general feel of the world is really good, but once you actually got to the proper endgame, you realize it was sort of missing a lot of depth to actually keep you around. So a few weeks of loving it, then a period of just sort of riding the wave until things were hopefully made better, but then Season 1 happened for the game, which was a bit of a shit show to begin with, and made tons of people quit. But then recently in October, Season 2 happened, fixed a ton of the issues with the game, added in a bit more endgame, and most importantly, it was actually fun to be playing the game. And so, as much as I have to acknowledge that this game is an absolutely bumpy road along the whole way, and me putting it here is not me forgiving it for its faults, I just believe that I can't have put the time into it that I have this year without it being one of my top games of the year, and so the lowest slot seems the appropriate place. Number 9, Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. This one is on the list because it excels in one very specific area. The game as a whole I think is a bit middling, but I personally really feel the need to reward something I think the industry as a whole should make better use of, and this game's sheer immersion factor is insane. Mostly as a result of the audio engine and the fact that just every single little sound that you hear, twigs snapping in the backing tracks, birds chirping, all of it comes from an actual creature walking around in the game, some sort of actual part of the environment around you. The map is for the most part a massive sprawling jungle, and you can literally fly through it on a mount, hearing sounds telling you the story of what is around you very simply. You can know when to stop for a hunting spree if you would hear the sound of certain prey, and one of my favorite things is you can genuinely navigate the game using the sound because it is accurate enough you may as well be able to use echolocation. The combat is definitely lacking in the game, sadly. It's a bit just sort of not innovative in any sense, which is the main reason it doesn't get a higher spot for me, but I definitely felt it was worth a bit of recognition where it did push boundaries, and I genuinely hope the games can learn from the stuff that Avatar did do particularly well. Number 8, Exoprimal. This one I fully accept is more of a personal love of mine. This year Capcom released this silly team fighting exosuits versus dinosaur horde PvP game, and if that sounds like a crazy mix of genres, it absolutely is. This game is exceedingly unique and it is a ton of fun in my opinion. I had such a good time with this game when I played it, and there isn't anything else like it out there. The biggest criticism that I have for the game is that to actually unlock things like new dinosaur enemies or new maps or game modes, you had to progress your story, and it could take a good 20 hours to actually beat the story, at which point you've probably lost the attention of a lot of people, which sucks because in my opinion the game simply gets better and better the more of it you actually unlock. It's hard to really explain, but there's just something so satisfying about sniping a Triceratops in the face or parrying a Carnotaur to unleash death on a team of enemy players with a counterattack. A truly unique experience that I look forward to seeing more from in the future. Number 7, Wild Hearts. This was a big one this year for me. This is the biggest real potential competitor to Monster Hunter that we've had release in quite a while, one looking to very specifically expand on the hunting genre. Not a game that just happens to have similar mechanics to Monster Hunter, but one that is designed from the ground up as a true competitor. The game wasn't quite on Monster Hunter's level of polish or anything like that, I think that is fair to say, but given it as their first attempt in this genre, I actually really enjoyed the game. I think the building systems are a unique take on hunting as well, and I actually found every weapon in the game satisfying to use in your hands, which is really important in that style of game, as being drawn to a variety of weapons can really up your playtime and up what you actually get out of it, and I personally quite like the kimono designs as well. There were a number of flaws with the game, one of the biggest ones being they never truly got PC performance actually fixed and optimized with the game, despite clearly trying quite hard to actually get it taken care of. And then there's just some mechanical stuff that I've talked about in greater detail before, but for every one of its faults for this game, it also has an interesting take or innovation in a genre that I really love, and it makes you just stop and think for a moment, and that is something that means a lot to me personally. Number 6, Lies of P. I can't believe I'm saying this in the year 2020 goddamn 23. But yeah, this game, based off of Pinocchio, the story of Pinocchio, is one of the crowning achievements in video games this year. Put simply, it is the most enjoyable, polished, and conceptually interesting Souls-like game that has ever been made by a studio not named FromSoft. The combat feels slick, yet weighty, punishing but also rewarding, and being based on parries and guard regain gives a lot of incentive to a very aggressive playstyle, which is definitely quite fun within the genre. And then even aside from the game's combat being a huge success, they managed to take the concept of the story of Pinocchio and turn it into this dark, dystopian world and adventure, and while it can be a bit predictable at points because it's obviously the story of Pinocchio with some twists, it is actually a really fun story and setting for the style of game too. Not to mention, a standout system to me is the ability to create your own weapon combinations of shafts and blades to create unique movesets with different weights, ranges, damage types, ability score scaling. There's just so much customization potential with the weapons within this combat system that really let you get funky with it and have quite a bit of fun. Number 5, Armored Core 6. Speaking of FromSoft, their new release of a game in 2023 was a sequel to a series that hasn't seen a proper new game in an extremely long time, and of course in that time FromSoft has built quite a following from other things, mostly from following the Soulsborne series and that style of games. This crowd saw a new game from their favorite game studio, but they had no idea what they were in for with Armored Core 6 because this game is absolutely not Dark Souls. In this game, you are essentially able to create your own mech to whatever degree of specificity that you can really desire. Hundreds if not thousands of different potential builds and combinations, vastly different playstyles between them, and all of that centered around a game with very enjoyable combat at its roots. A vast yet somewhat confusing world, and just some absolutely incredibly fun combat and bosses to boot. This game had the polish and quality of a Souls game, just on a very different concept and genre, and as it turns out, mech games are freaking awesome, especially when they really let you have as much control over your designs as Armored Core 6 does. Number 4, Spider-Man 2. This game does exactly what you want it to do, really. It takes what made Spider-Man 1 such a great game and improves on it. One of the main hooks is the ability to swap between Peter and Miles, always having the two Spider-Men as your options, each having their own emotional story build-up, their own abilities, and the whole game is just playable like this. The dynamic between these characters is great, the web swinging in the game is even better than the first one, which is saying quite a lot, and without wanting to spoil anything that isn't obvious, there are some really cool abilities that you can unlock later on in the story, but put simply, I think this game was pretty accurately represented at the Game Awards this year, where it was nominated for like 7 awards and won 0 of them. In a less competitive year, this game would have been much more notable, but this year especially, it is just a very, very solid game, improving in almost every aspect on its predecessor as any good sequel should, but not innovating quite enough to be on the same level to me as some of the other heavy hitters of the year. Number 3, Hi-fi Rush. Something a lot of you probably know about me if you watch the channel regularly is that I'm a big music guy. I love music, I love sounds, I play a bunch of instruments, and this game sort of came out of nowhere and took my brain by storm. I didn't have the free time to play it when it first released at the beginning of the year, but I did get around to it finally a couple of months ago, and it was absolutely worth the time. This game is an action-adventure game that is also a rhythm game. Attack combos, parries, dodges with iframes, all kinds of cool special moves that just make a good basic combat system, but the best part of it to me is that all of these things coincide perfectly with the beat of the backing tracks. There is a permanent soundtrack playing, different tracks for each stage or each boss, and every bit of sound design of the world lines up perfectly on the beat, always playing into the music of the world. And the same happens with your combat. Attacks will always hit enemies on the beat, and you can do stronger attacks and combos by timing your inputs perfectly on beat as well. So basically it's just a really cool conceptual mix of a rhythm game and a beat-em-up brawler style action adventure game with a killer soundtrack to boot. I'm a massive fan of this. I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't heard of it before. Number 2, Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Any other year, this would be number 1, without a doubt, and that really just shows what we have this year. Of course, this game is a masterclass in storytelling, living up to that classic Zelda pedigree, but then on top of that, the world itself is massive and filled to the brim with interesting activities that reward your exploration effectively at every stage of your journey. And as if that wasn't enough, as honestly most of this is just revisiting and improving upon Breath of the Wild, the whole physics and creation engine and mechanics within the game are absolutely unbelievable. The way the abilities work, the types of crazy machines that people have been able to make, this game is essentially a full-on vehicle creation sandbox simulator that also happens to be tacked onto a full Legend of Zelda game, and that is the best way that I can put it. Even without all the wacky creation and physics stuff, this game would still be a solid like 8 out of 10, but the absolute depth and intrigue of that system just shoved on top of it and how cool it is when you use it right makes this such a solid 10 out of 10 game, but still only number 2 in my opinion this year because of number 1, Baldurs Gate 3. I mean, come on. This is the game of infinite choices. Story-based games, especially RPGs, always love to tell you that your choices matter, give you 2 dialogue lines, and then have them change very little things, very minuscule, sometimes even nothing. But Baldurs Gate 3 is the exact antithesis of that. A game based around the systems of Dungeons & Dragons 5th editions. Sometimes the game does actually feel like something absolutely impossible, which is the freedom of Dungeons & Dragons brought into a static scripted video game. No matter what your objective is within this game, there are probably 100 different ways that you can do it, all of which with their own unique dialogue, character interactions, rewards, information, all of it that makes it different every time that you tackle the same situation. You can speedrun this game in 20 minutes if you want to. You can spend hundreds of hours on a single playthrough, and I honestly think that no one singular player will actually ever experience everything this game has to offer, which in a way makes the community of the game even stronger too, as we get to share our different stories as to how things unfolded differently at certain points of our playthroughs. Not to mention the actual tactical complexity that it offered as well, for those who really wanted to min-max absolutely every part of it. The builds that were possible were absolutely bananas in the best of ways, and not to mention that none of the things I've ever said, even up to this point, mention the killer soundtrack, the incredible story that they actually wrote for the game itself, the absolutely stellar voice acting, like pretty much unmatched as a full cast for like the last decade, and then of course the fact that the developers are still constantly updating and improving the game. An absolute masterpiece, the best game this year, and honestly the best game that we've had for a number of years before this too. That's it for my list then. What do you all think? Do you agree, disagree, or are you just happy to be along for the ride? Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.